Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the second Green Campus webinar. Green Campus is a project that we run here at Altınbaş University, and it's supported by British Council Turkey and the Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges in the UK. And this is Esra Kaliber. I'm the project coordinator, and I'm honored today to have Professor James Longhurst as the speaker. And the title of his talk is University Action for Climate Change. Before he starts his talk, I would like to briefly introduce him to the audience. James Longhurst is Professor of Environmental Science and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability at University of the West of England in Bristol. He leads the university's sustainability agenda, ensuring that sustainability considerations are present in the university's teaching, research, campus operations, and civic engagement work. His 35-year research career has focused on air and carbon management and urban sustainability. He has produced over 225 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters and edited 24 books. He has been a panelist and reviewer for numerous research bodies in the UK, Germany, Portugal, and South Africa. Since 2000, he has been the co-chair of the annual Air Pollution Conference. He has advised national and international government departments, private companies, and third sector bodies on air and carbon management. His national roles currently include Vice President of the UK Institution of Environmental Sciences, Honorary Vice President of Environmental Protection UK, Chair of the Board of Directors and Trustees for the Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges, EAUC in short, and co-chair of QAA and Advanced Higher Education Advisory Group, preparing the updated guidance on education for sustainable development for the higher education sector. Okay, and a note for the audience, as far as I can see, we have a mixed audience bringing together university staff, students at undergraduate and postgraduate level. Please, as the talk goes on, you can type your comments and questions. And after his talk, which will be around 40 minutes, I guess, we are going to collect the questions and comments. Okay, thank you again, Professor James Longhurst, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Ezra, and thank you for the invitation to speak in your Green Campus webinar series. I'm really delighted that you were successful in your bid to the British Council in Turkey to support you in this work. Good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to be in Turkey, or indeed perhaps some of you in the UK as well. What I will speak to you about today is, as the title shows, University Action for Climate Change. And of course, when we think about climate, we have to acknowledge there's great uncertainty ahead. Today in Bristol, in the west of England, where I am, there is a beautiful blue sky, but only a week ago, it was really very cold, and in parts of the UK were -20. And I understand Turkey and Istanbul has had some very heavy snowfalls and some welcome rainfall as well. So the climate is very uncertain in many ways. So what I want to do is to provide a context for university action about the climate emergency. And in doing so, just to give a short overview of some of the things that do make this an emergency. And then I'll speak about some of the requirements for action. Why should universities engage? And then to go on to talk about a body that's been established in the United Kingdom called the Climate Commission, which is pulling together institutional actions to support universities and others providing education with guidance on how to engage with this climate emergency from an educational perspective. And I'll give some examples from that. And I've shared my slides with Ezra, and I've shared a document that I'll be referring to later, and Ezra will be sharing that with those of you who've registered today. So Just to put a bit of context then, we need action now. We need a 50% reduction in emissions of climate active gases, and we need to do that now. Short-term actions, not just long-term targets. This is Sir Bob Watson speaking, who was the first chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that was quoted only this weekend in a UK newspaper, The Guardian. What he's saying here is that fine words and long-term aspirations are not enough. We need to be acting now. And one of the reasons we need to be acting is because students in universities, they are going to live through the changing climate. A graduate who leaves a UK university this year will expect to live another 60 years of life. And by the 2080s, there will be wide-ranging adverse climate impact effects. And that is because we have locked climate change into the atmosphere. And our graduates will live through those profound changes. So how will their educational experience prepare them for that challenge? And as we think of the next cohort of students that will come into university, they increasingly will be concerned about the climate emergency, expecting us to take things seriously, to manage things wisely, and to prepare them for that challenge. And if universities don't respond positively, I argue they will be failing their students. And there's an image there from when Greta Thunberg visited Bristol, and literally thousands turned out to hear her speak in the pouring rain. And many of you will know the United Kingdom is renowned for being a wet place. And on that day, it lived up to every expectation of being wet. Now, it is a real crisis, but there are some glimmers of hope for why the climate emergency might have some positive actions by universities. But to put that in context, in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said we had 12 years to mitigate emissions enough to keep global temperature increases by the end of this century to just 1.5 degrees. But we are off track. We are badly off track. This November, there's an opportunity to get back on track when the Conference of the Parties who resume their negotiations in Glasgow in Scotland in November. The question is, will there be sufficient commitment to really grasp the opportunity to restrict global temperature increases by 1.5 degrees? Doesn't look too positive at the moment. We have a policy framework, this UN Sustainable Development Goals, that can really help us, but we're seeing a superficial engagement in many cases with the SDGs. So can higher education step up and provide leadership, particularly a place-based leadership, working at the local level? So I'll talk a little bit about some of those matters as I go through. But let's be clear that climate change is real and our actions are the main causal agent. That's not me saying that, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And you'll see on the next set of slides, I'm quoting from a UNEP resource on climate change. When you get these slides, you'll be able to link to that site and to see the rich depth of material that is there. But what this climate change issue is all about is the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, directly linked to average global temperature. As the concentration of greenhouse gases has been increasing, so has the average or the mean global temperature. And this has been happening since the Industrial Revolution. And it's principally due to the burning of fossil fuels. Simplistically, reducing the burning of fossil fuels will be one of the most rapid ways that we can take action. And we're living in really uncertain times, as I indicated at the beginning. There are more and more severe heat waves, more frequently, more severe rainfall events, more drought-prone areas as the climate changes, more and stronger wildfires. And over the last decade, 1.3 billion people have been affected by floods and droughts and heat waves and cold, such that they required emergency assistance. That's just over 1 in 7 of the global population. And it is people in low-income countries that really are affected the most. So we are now living with a 1.1 degree increase in temperature compared to the pre-industrial level. And in 2019, we concluded a decade of exceptional global heating, retreating ice, and sea level rises driven by our activities. And when you look at the data, you see the hottest years on record, or the hottest periods of decadal records. And we had the highest ever global greenhouse gas emissions in 2018. And according to the data pre-pandemic, we were on track to have an emission by 2030 that's twice what it should be if we were serious about 1.5 degrees of warming. So to prevent warming of beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade, we need to reduce emissions by at least 8% every year, and we're nowhere near that. We have legally binding commitments through the Paris Agreement, but those national pledges are not sufficient to curb greenhouse gases for the amount that is needed. So when we come to Glasgow in November for COP26, it really is the most important meeting that will happen in the across the planet. We really do need to see commitments that are substantial and are urgently put into place. And if we cannot agree that, or we don't see the speed of emission reduction that is needed, it could be that we would need at least a cut of 15.5% every year by 2026, and that is nigh on impossible. And we simply do need to acknowledge that we need a really rapid rate of decarbonisation if we are to achieve 1.5 degrees of warming, and not as we are heading at the moment to something in excess of 3 degrees or even more by the end of the century. We need to see targets, and we need to see timelines, and a move to much more energy from renewable sources. And if we don't, we're going to see some really significant impacts across the globe. There are serious climate impacts at 1.5 degrees, but if it's 2 degrees, it is really very significant. At 2 degrees, 99% of coral reefs may die. Insects will lose twice as much of their habitat as they would at 1.5 degrees of warming. The Arctic Ocean will be free of sea ice in summer once in a decade at 2 degrees C, and something like 16 million people will be affected by sea level rises if we have a 2 degree rise. And we will see much more in the way of extreme and intense droughts, storms, and other weather events. So this is all very serious. And it's not that we haven't known about this for a very long time. We just haven't taken the action. So what can universities do? That's the backdrop to a really serious global climate emergency. So what can we do? Well, we can play in our own countries and in our own localities. We can have a powerful role in supporting decarbonisation. With thought leaders, every university provides the thought leadership in its communities and beyond. So we can help shape public opinion and build the case for action. We can use our financial resources in a way that reduces indirect emissions. We can educate our students about climate change and how the future will require them to have different skills and knowledge and to develop different attributes. We can use our research powers to understand more about the consequences of climate change and to research solutions for living in a future climate that will be adverse. And we can assure ourselves that the campus that we inhabit is adapted for a future climate. And of course, we must rapidly reduce emissions associated with our own activities. And in the UK, just to give you an example, there are very large numbers of institutions of education. There are over 4.5 million students. There are over 545,000 academic staff. If you add all those together, that's 7.7% of the UK population. That is a very powerful group for advocating change, using the power of the student voice for change. But the universities and colleges, they spend a very large amount of money every year, in excess of £43 billion. If we were able to use those resources wisely, there would be a huge potential impact on action to reach what we call net zero emissions. But that requires really significant change. So to help bring about that change, in the United Kingdom, we have established a climate commission, and the EAUC is one of the 4 organisations that originated the climate commission. And we did that because action is needed at pace, because it's an emergency and we need to do more and to do it quickly. So the purpose of the commission was to catalyse action, to speed up action for real impact. And there are a number of commissioners, and I have the privilege of being one, that provides direction and leadership to move this agenda forward. So there are 4 climate commissioners, but importantly, there are 5 students who are climate commissioners as well. And they provide important and equal voices in shaping and directing the work of the commission. And I've been joined by one of my cats. This is Phoebe, by the way. She'll come back probably later. So we've been going since November 2019. Originally, we were going to just have 1 year of climate commission work because COP26 was to be in November 2020, but now, of course, it's November 21. The 5 priorities we established were about mobilizing the voice of the sector to have real impact. Remember the 7.76% of the UK population in this group, to bring our research and innovation capabilities to the fore, to demonstrate what we can do as a sector, to measure and report on our own emissions, to be clear and consistent in saying, this is our emission of carbon dioxide equivalent gases, and this is how it's falling, and this is how we assure ourselves it is falling quickly. But we recognized that there is locked in climate change, whether we liked it or not. So we need to adapt to a future climate. So we have set a priority around adaptation, and we have set a priority around the educational experience of our students. How will their curriculum enable them to both understand and then to live and act in a changing climate? So we identified those priorities. We set up a number of evidence gathering sessions, very well attended, all done through Zoom and equivalent, where we interrogated expert witnesses to understand the current position. We brought all of the different evidence gathering together in a synthesized set of findings with the intention of developing an action plan for institutions, no matter where they were, early or very advanced in their action. There will be something in the action planning to help them move at pace. So I produced an initial draft back in April of 2020, which was essentially about collaborative action covering adaptation, mitigation, and action at the local level of your place, wherever you are. And as well as that, it covered the issues that students will need to understand and be enabled to act with across their educational experience and onwards as graduates. And that was then developed and extended to become 2 very important documents: a climate action roadmap for colleges and a climate action toolkit for universities. And a consultancy in the United Kingdom called the Nous Group supported the development of these. And I'm going to go on and talk about both of them in a little bit of detail. But the toolkit for higher education, I've shared that with Ezra, and she will share that with all of the registered individuals on this webinar. So just looking very quickly at the college roadmap, and just to point out, you can see at the bottom of this slide a link to the roadmap itself, and also to note the organisations there that supported its development as founding members of the Climate Commission. That's the Association of Colleges, Guild HE, Universities UK, and EAUC. So what we have in this is, and rest assured, I'm not going to go into all the detail on this, but it is a roadmap of actions to take, whether you are just beginning your engagement with climate action in your institution, or whether you're established but maybe midway in your journey. And if you are a leading institution who has begun to get to grips with some of the trickier issues, there is something in this roadmap for each and every organisation, no matter where you are on your journey towards climate action and ideally a net zero position. And now moving on to the toolkit for the higher education sector. Again, the same organisations, and again, you have the link to go into some of the wider resources that are on the website. So this is just the opening part of the document. I've just cut various elements from the document to illustrate it. The important thing here is that this is not a static resource. It is intended to be dynamic and updated with regular additions from not just the United Kingdom, but anyone doing good things that can be shared that will accelerate action. We would hope to include them. And the idea is to accelerate action to reach net zero emissions by 2030 and to reduce the so-called scope 3 emissions, the indirect emissions, as soon as possible, but not later than 2050. So the toolkit comes in 3 elements: the critical elements, the suggested steps by the commissioners for universities to take, and a series of resources. Now, when you see the document, you will be able to click on to all of those resources, and they may well provide ideas where students who are engaging in the British Council funded work can see the scope and the opportunity for their own ideas to expand upon these particular elements. So each of the toolkit themes corresponds to one of the 5 priorities adopted by the Climate Commission. That's mobilising the voice, research and innovation, student experience, deep adaptation, and measuring and reporting. So what I'm going to do with each of these is just very quickly go through the headlines. I won't go into the particular detail, but just to give you the insight into what the Commission is recommending to the 5 key elements here. So thinking then firstly about leadership, the university managers, the vice chancellors, the steps that we're asking them to take. Firstly is to speak out, to acknowledge the importance and the urgency in their correspondence, in their communications with all sorts of different entities. Acknowledge this is real and urgent, and do that with your staff, with your students, with your other stakeholders. This is a declaration of a climate emergency that we're asking people to both recognise and to commit to action. And in that action, making sure that as a senior leadership team in a university, your management and governance arrangements actually think about what that means in terms of a changing climate. And that means you need to understand where you are and to analyse your data and to make sure you have the right data to understand the climate implications. So conduct a data gap analysis, and then make sure the right information is being collected. When we come to teaching, probably the most important activity of any university, we are asking that every university program, no matter what it is, it could be sociology, it could be nursing, it could be chemistry, doesn't matter what it is, every program needs to help students understand climate emergency and what that will mean for their future life. So embed this into the curriculum. Doesn't have to overtake the important parts of the curriculum. It needs to be woven into the curriculum. And there are some things in curricula that have particular carbon impacts, and where travel is associated with a particular form of study, understand the carbon implications through the data. Make sure that you've reached a particular view about air travel. But in order for the curriculum to be enriched and infused with climate action, staff need to be confident and capable and articulate. And that means staff need to have training on carbon literacy and the climate. And that is a very strong recommendation. As we move into research and knowledge exchange, we're asking that the research processes are reviewed to minimize carbon emissions associated with the process of research. Researchers, of which I'm one, we have a tendency to fly around the world to attend conferences, but Zoom and other technologies have given us the opportunity for virtual conference engagement. But all we're saying here is asking universities to review their research processes. And when it comes to the research agenda, to make sure that the opportunities in the research that is being supported by institutions is properly addressing climate mitigation and adaptation issues. One can argue that every part of the research agenda has a climate impact, and we need to understand those and to make sure that the engagement becomes a positive one. There is a huge opportunity to work with local commerce and industry to support their transition to a low carbon economy, and the research agenda can infuse and support that transition. And we can argue, because universities are good at arguing, we can argue that national research priorities properly encompass climate considerations. We have a very strong local agenda opportunity as well. So we should work with our local partners, community groups and others, to ensure that carbon is present as an element of the decision-making in strategies, in plans and projects. How can we decarbonize the actions in our local communities? And how can we work with them to embed ideas of climate justice so that it is not just the poorest in society that suffer the worst climate impacts? And then how, as a university, can you empower your students' union to engage students in climate action? And students are really ready to engage, at least my experience. Students really do see this as a major concern, and they are looking for help and leadership and guidance. The Students' Union can be part of it, as well as the institution itself. And then when we come to the campus of a university, there are a range of steps, some of which, as I go through them now, are ideally suited for project work as part of this initiative that Ezra has launched. So things to do with energy and its management, things to do with the emissions of carbon and other greenhouse gases, the way in which the university requires transport, both surface transport and air transport, the way in which we buy and provide food in our canteens for students and staff. All of these have significant climate impacts, which are things that the university can act upon. And our procurement, we buy enormous amounts of things. Every university spends huge amounts of money. One of the things we can do is to make sure our procurement policies properly embed climate issues in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of our purchasing and working with our supply chains to ensure that they too recognize the climate issues and are working to reduce their carbon footprint. When it comes to our buildings, we need to make sure that we have both adapted our buildings to a future climate, but also our energy provision for those buildings is as efficient as possible and as low carbon as possible. And then finally, biodiversity, how we can take advantage of enhancing the quality of the green environment on our campus to make sure that there is a rich and diverse array of the natural world wherever we can find it on campus. And it can be part of a local insetting arrangement as part of one's carbon management hierarchy. Now, with all of those university actions, graduates will be well prepared and understand what the climate emergency means for them. And one of the important considerations that people leaving university and entering the world of work will want to know, well, how can I find the right opportunity in a decarbonising world? Well, working towards net zero is going to create plentiful job opportunities for new graduates. A wide range of jobs will see a significant increase in demand in any city that's making changes to net zero. In the case of Bristol, where I live and work, it's been estimated that there will be something like 75,000 to 100,000 person years of work if the city is to achieve net zero by 2030. And they will be a mixture of skilled, highly skilled and low skilled jobs. So there will be a real upturn in employment opportunities across all the different sectors of employment. The best research that I've seen suggests that this is the likely number, and that's in one city. So it will be very positive in that sense. But just coming to a few slides to wrap up, thinking about this climate and its associated ecological emergency, it demands new thinking by universities. It requires more than just a simple declaration of concern. It's not enough to say, we think this is terrible, it ought to be dealt with. It requires actions to demonstrate leadership. We need to firstly make the statement of a climate emergency, but then we need to develop the strategy, the plans and policy that will create the solutions, whilst acknowledging that, as I said before, some change is already locked in, but we can do a lot to reduce the impact of those changes. But if a university makes a statement, a declaration, and doesn't undertake the review of its culture, its policies, its processes, and its incentives, it's not a declaration of any value, it's a token gesture, so-called greenwashing. We need real commitment. And we need that because it's a real and current threat. One of the good things about the pandemic is that it's shown us how quickly universities can change when faced with an emergency situation. And we now need to take that speed and agility of response into how we engage with the climate emergency. Recovering from the pandemic will require mindsets and curricula in university to adapt at pace so that we deliver the skills, the knowledge and the competencies that students, future graduates require for the low carbon future. And we need to be alert to the expectations of our current and our future students and those of our graduates who will live and work in this world of a climate emergency. And students are the actors for change in this. Students have a very powerful opportunity to influence how their university operates in respect to the climate emergency. Students can argue and lobby, they can provide ideas for action, and above all, they can consistently remind universities that it is they who will live through the impact of a changing climate. As I said, a university graduate this year will have at least 60 years of life. By the 2080s, many of the climate impacts that we can do little or nothing about will have been lived through by today's graduates. And that, just about on time, Ezra, will be just an acknowledgement to my fellow climate commissioners and members of the steering group, a group of academics, students and colleagues from the institutions that come together to run the climate. Sorry, for some reason it muted then. I did warn Ezra that Zoom and my laptop don't like one another. So that's it. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I hope there is something of interest there and has given you some insights into the opportunities. I'll stop sharing now and over to you, Ezra.
Okay, thank you, James, for your insightful and inspiring talk. That was a lot of food for thought and action as well. It's depressing to hear that we are off track as far as the 1.5 degrees target is concerned, but at least it's enheartening to hear universities and particularly students will be the major actors for change in the university community. And as I was reading your climate action toolkit for higher education sector, I've seen that it involves almost everyone in a campus, in a university. Everyone means the governors, senior management teams, university staff, including teaching and admin staff, students, and alumni. And one question that comes to my mind is, are we talking about a top-down or bottom-up approach? I mean, in other words, is it the governors and the management team of the university who is taking action and recommending policies, or is it the students or staff who are encouraging and requesting the university management to take action through lobbying or through their actions, which is usually the case?
It varies. In some institutions, the Vice-Chancellor and the Board of Governors have taken the initiative. In others, students have lobbied for change because they didn't think their institution was taking this seriously enough. In other instances, it's staff that have used their own lobbying power to say, as a university, we need to do more and we need to do it quicker. And of course, academic staff have the ability to do a variety of things within the degree programs that they teach. But actually, it's when you join it up and you make it a whole institution approach that it really has real power. And so, you know, when the top down and the bottom up come together, that's when it really is a powerful social action for change. And we're seeing that in a good number of universities. But I don't want to give the impression that universities are all engaged in this in a consistent and coherent way. Many are, but by no means all. And we need, if we are to use the power of the higher education and the further education sector for change, we do need to bring more and more of those institutions into the process of putting the climate action at the heart of institutional change. Because what I would argue is that the climate emergency is the emergency. We're dealing with a pandemic, and vaccines permitting, we will soon have some exit from that pandemic. But the climate emergency is so much more profound and so large that we really do need to have all of the intellectual powers that we have working to address this. It's not as simple as a vaccine.
Okay. I want to move on to the questions from the audience. As far as I see, there are 2 at the moment. You can type your questions, or if you prefer to talk, you can just raise your hand, or you can type in the chat box so I can activate your microphone if you prefer to talk. I can see a question from Didem Soyaltın from Altınbaş University. Actually, she has 2 questions. Okay, the first one goes like this. Young climate activists, most notably Greta Thunberg, have become a powerful voice for climate action around the world, yet they have been also subject to a series of attacks from right-wing establishment figures and climate deniers. We know that right-wing populist leaders are gaining power in many parts of the world. So how do you see the future of the youth climate action under these circumstances?
It's very sad that passionate, committed young people find themselves being attacked by climate deniers and others through the medium of social media and sometimes in newspapers and other journalism, or so-called journalism. I think that those people are misguided and deluded in their climate denial activity. Young people are incredibly passionate and concerned about the climate emergency, and their voices are not going to be silenced. They know that what is happening to the climate is really serious, and it is their life course that those changes will play out in. They expect action. They will be happy to be part of the action, but they know that they have to stimulate others who are in leadership positions to take that action. And they're using their voice and their weight of numbers to try and make that case. And they're fighting a battle. Climate deniers have easy action to spreading lies and part truths, and that is something that we all need to be alert to, and to be able to come and support those individuals who are being attacked. And we need to do that in ways that are appropriate and ways that are respectful. But our role as academics is to seek truth and to share truth. And when we see lies, when we see false fake news and so forth, we need to engage and to share truth and to talk truth to power.
Yep. Didem's second question is about the youth again. She thinks climate activists, they mostly come from educated and high income families. So there's a common assumption that environmentalism is an elitist movement. Mm. How can we break this myth and make climate action more inclusive?
Absolutely, there is a need to make climate and broader sustainability work inclusive. It is something that university and university students are particularly part of. Historically, universities haven't been particularly diverse communities, but that is changing in a large number of countries. I think one of the important things is to recognize that there is a huge injustice in the way the climate impacts will affect different members of society, and low-income countries around the world, for example, will see the worst impacts of a changing climate. So trying to reach out across the world to different low-income groups in different countries to act not in a I'm telling you how to do it model, but to say, look, how can we help? And there isn't a simple solution here. It is highly complicated, and there are many organizations trying to improve diversity. It's beginning to take shape that we have a more diverse environmental movement. but it is very Western European traditionally. It is very white and middle class, and that needs to change, because those people are probably, and I'm one of them, they're better protected from the climate and its adverse impacts. We have a moral responsibility, I believe, for those who will suffer the worst excesses, and often they're not the ones who have made any particular contribution to the emissions of greenhouse gases. So that moral responsibility in my mind is very strong.
Yeah, that's why we are talking about climate justice when we talk about climate change as well. And another question here on my screen is from Ali Nihat Eken from Sabancı University. He says, it's not a question, but a big thank you for raising awareness. As a teacher who teaches literature, I couldn't help thinking I should find novels and short stories that explore climate issues, and I should incorporate them into my teaching. We can all do something for our world.
Well, that's great. One of the things that I'm also involved with at the moment is producing new guidance for higher education in the UK on the subject of education for sustainable development. And we're making the point that every discipline can take that broader perspective. So it's great to hear that comment about finding novels and other forms of literature that can enrich the understanding of students of literature. So fantastic, great to hear.
Because you were talking about incorporating climate change and action into curricula, that has a lot of pathways. I mean, we are talking about including new material in our teaching, but we are also talking about giving students new competencies and skills to be more equipped as far as the climate change is concerned. I think that's the tricky part of teaching that we need to think about now. And I'm not sure where to start going about this.
Well, at the end of March, the guidance that I've just referred to will be published, and that has many ways in for very many disciplines. As soon as the document is published, I will send you a copy.
Okay.
And although it uses British examples because it is for UK higher education, many of those are directly transferable to other educational settings. So that's an action on me.
Okay, so, great. I'm looking forward to having
and perhaps you can share that with other educators that have been part of this webinar. Okay,
surely I will. I'll keep a list of people interested in this webinar updated about your publications and actions as well. I cannot see any more questions from the audience right now. Perhaps more will come up, and that gives me time to ask another question I have in mind, which was in the Toolkit document as well, and it was talking about the nudge theory. It's related to the campus management, and it's basically saying that universities can nudge their students to take actions or to start thinking about climate action. Hey, do you have any examples of this in your university in Bristol?
I think one of the things that is useful to think about is why might nudge be part of a bigger set of actions. And for universities that are beginning to find an engagement with the climate emergency, how can they encourage students to recycle better, or to ensure food that is not consumed, is waste, is being properly binned in receptacles where they can then go to a composting facility or similar. So by the positioning of particular recycling facilities and the priority of particular types of recycling, you're creating almost a subliminal nudge for students to use a particular facility in preference to a general waste bin, for example. And of course, if we can encourage compostable materials to be composted or to go to a digester to produce biogas, then we are reducing the climate impact of the waste food. So simple little things like that, making it easier for certain types of activity that can then have that nudge effect. But nudge on its own isn't enough. You need ultimately to eliminate other things that might be easy to do in terms of disposing of something or purchasing something. If you remove other options and create circumstances in which the only choice is the right choice, then you're going to have a much more profound action.
And do we have a document or a set of standards where universities can assess themselves to see where they stand for sustainability and to meet sustainability standards in higher education?
There are a number of things that one can do. The Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges has the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard, which is a self-assessment tool for universities to assess their overall environmental management. The Students Organising for Sustainability, which is part of the National Union of Students in the United Kingdom, they produce an accreditation scheme called Responsible Futures, which assesses the performance of the Students' Union and its university and awards an accreditation mark for those that meet the right threshold. And then there is the International Standards Organization for Environmental Management, ISO 14001, which has a really well-defined set of standards and operating principles, which many universities are beginning to engage with, which is a certification to the standard and requires a third-party, external party to validate on a regular basis that the certification is both valid and the continuous improvement part of the standard is being followed. So a number of choices, some of them involve money, some in the case of ISO 14001 quite expensive. In the case of the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard, that's pretty much a free-ish resource. And Responsible Futures is a paid for resource as well. I'm sure that Responsible Futures, should other institutions be interested in following it, I'm sure that it's applicable to institutions around the world. And then there are other things like the International Green Gowns, which celebrate the success of institutions in taking actions. And encourage all universities to think about the International Green Gowns as a means of sharing their sustainability successes, and to to learn from others who have been part of it as well. There's nothing, there's nothing that should be off-putting about entering into the Green Gowns. They're a fantastic sharing resource, and there's a great resource on the EAUC website of previous entries for Green Gowns from countries around the world. So have a go.
And as far as I can see, students or university staff or universities themselves can apply for the awards. Is that,
yes? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's and the International Green Gowns are open at the moment. So Turkish institutions that would like to submit their good practices and their ideas, welcome to find it. You will find links on the EAUC website, and maybe you could pop that into the chat for participants, or share it after the webinar concludes.
Okay. And the project of our website, which is greencampusturkey.com will very soon this week include a section for resources that people can refer to see international networks and what they are doing and what are the standards for climate action and the written documents. And I'm trying to pile up all these together so that I can include in my web page. But I would like to write in the chat box the Green Gown awards. Hopefully I can do that. All right. I don't think I know how to. I don't know how to write in the chat box so that everyone can see. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh yeah, here we have a different section. Okay, panelists and attendees. Okay. I'm going to share the link later on.
Okay.
Right.
I've just seen there's another question has come in.
I can see another one. It's by Tolga Demiryol from Altınbaş University again. About a quarter of the universities in the UK, as far as he knows, have committed to divestment from fossil fuel companies. But if anything can the students do to facilitate this process?
Yes, that's where they use their power of argument and lobbying their university. That in many cases, the university income is entirely dependent on students. It's indirectly, you can say that much of the university resource is students' money through their fees, through accommodation, and they would expect their money to be used for good purposes. And fossil fuels are the cause of our climate emergency, and they can politely ask and then increase the urgency of the ask to a demand and ask for good reasons why the university is continuing to degrade the global climate when there are other options available. And there are, as the person who asked the question acknowledged, lots of universities in the UK have divested from investments that were in stocks and shares that were in fossil fuel companies. But a lot of universities don't have that type of investment. And so my own university has no investments in stocks or shares. But what we have done in our ethical investment policy is to say, if the university ever thought it would do that, this policy, which very clearly says that we wouldn't invest in fossil fuel, oil, gas, coal. So even though we don't have any, we've protected ourselves against a future risk. But what we've also done, and what other institutions are doing, where certain types of employees of the university are in a pension fund, then lobbying the pension fund to ensure that they divest themselves of fossil fuel investments. And that's an ongoing set of arguments. So, but we're slowly decarbonising a particular pension fund that professional service staff in the university are members of. And that's a good start, but we need more action on that.
Okay. Yeah, we always need more action, and we need to engage more and more people, like the university community and non-university community.
And talking about the non-university community, it's probably just worth mentioning two things that my university is doing, and other universities are doing similar things, but we are working with our local municipality. We cover two different municipalities. One is the City of Bristol and the other is South Gloucestershire Council. And in both of these councils have declared a climate emergency and have set a target of reaching net zero by 2030. and the university is providing academic support for both councils to help the council work through what that means in terms of actions that must be taken, what's the strategy, and how do we implement the strategy. And as I said, other universities around the country are working with their municipalities as well. And that's one of the really important things. We can do more by working together, because our own target is 2030 as well, which is only 9 years away now, or less than, but we're making reasonably good progress.
Okay, so on this positive note, I think we are ready to conclude the webinar. If we don't have any more questions in the chat box, I'm just checking again. No, that's all for the questions. And so I would like to thank James Longhurst again for his time and enthusiasm to give us this insightful talk. And I'm going to keep the panelists and the audience updated about the project, the Green Campus project, and I'll be happy to share the documents James will pass on to me. So please drop an email if you are interested in reading those documents, and if you're interested in the Green Campus project, because we have a competition going on now. And the webpage, as I said, is greencampusturkey.com. Okay, so I'm going to finish here, and I hope I would like to let you know about the webinar on Friday, which will be about carbon footprint by Sevil Acar from Bosphorus University. And that's all for today's webinar. And I would like to thank everyone who attended, and especially James Longhurst for his talk.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, Ezra, and thank you to the audience for listening. And I hope there's some useful insights and ideas there for you.
Thank you, and
Okay.
goodbye.
Bye-bye.